At Naval Station Norfolk, tension hung heavily over every technician and senior officer gathered on the pier. Under the glare of bright lights, the massive, imposing silhouette of the guided missile destroyer USS Freedom, one of the U.S. Navy's most cutting-edge warships, lay silently moored. A critical problem had just surfaced. The ship's main engine had unexpectedly shut down only hours before a top-secret, high-stakes mission was due to begin. Rear Admiral Michael Harris stood rigidly in the operations center, his keen eyes fixed on the team of technicians working around the clock to identify the fault. Though his face remained composed, a deep worry churned beneath the surface. This mission was one of the Pentagon's highest priorities. Even the smallest hiccup now could lead to unimaginable consequences. A brief warning bell jolted everyone in the room. Harris glanced toward Chief Engineer Ryan Watkins, a brilliant but sometimes overconfident 34-year-old. Watkins frowned, shook his head, and stepped forward, his face ashen. "Admiral, we've exhausted every protocol, but the engine still won't restart," Watkins reported quietly. "All sensors read normal. Our diagnostics show no signs of mechanical failure. Honestly, sir, we're at a loss." Harris paused, eyes sweeping the room. Every pair of eyes was on him, waiting. He checked his watch, time was slipping away, and the pressure pressed down like a vice. "How much time do we have?" he asked without preamble. Watkins swallowed hard. "Just over 48 hours, sir. And even if we pinpoint the issue now, it'll take at least 24 more hours to repair." The room seemed to freeze. Harris turned and stared out the large window toward USS Freedom, her hull bathed in white light, like a sleeping beast awaiting awakening. At that moment, a young communications officer, Lieutenant Ethan Roberts, approached hesitantly. "Sir Harris, I know this sounds odd, but under the circumstances, perhaps we should consider bringing someone in." Harris pivoted, eyebrows raised. "Who?" Roberts took a breath, as if wrestling with himself. "A retired engineering officer, quite a legend in naval propulsion. My father, retired Admiral Thomas Roberts, mentioned him a few times. He was a genius with ship engines, but left the Navy under unfortunate circumstances." "And his name?" Harris prompted sharply. "Elijah Carter, sir," Roberts whispered. "He was forced into retirement after an incident aboard the first USS Freedom 25 years ago." A heavy silence fell. A few senior officers exchanged glances of surprise and discomfort. Elijah Carter's name still carried a wound in Norfolk's history. Harris said nothing, but memories flooded his mind. Elijah Carter had been a stellar engineering officer, a rare mechanical prodigy. 25 years ago, he was blamed for a catastrophic engine failure on the old USS Freedom and quietly drummed out of the service. Many believed he'd been wronged, a victim of bias and injustice. Harris drew in a long breath before making the decision he knew would change everything. "Roberts, get me Carter's phone number. I want to speak with him, immediately." Roberts nodded and hurried off. As Harris waited, he noticed Watkins watching him with a look of thinly veiled skepticism. But personal feelings were irrelevant now. The sole focus was getting USS Freedom mission ready. Minutes later, Roberts returned with a scrap of paper. Harris dialed at once. The long, tense rings echoed before a gravelly voice answered, "Carter here." A brief pause. Harris spoke clearly, respectfully. "Mr. Carter, this is Rear Admiral Michael Harris at Norfolk. You may not remember me, but the Navy desperately needs your help." Silence stretched so long Harris feared the line had gone dead, until Carter's voice, edged with quiet pain, replied, "Harris, I remember. After everything, you really want me back?" Harris held firm. "Sir, I won't sugarcoat it. USS Freedom's main engine is down, and only you can fix this. Will you help?" Another silence. Then Carter said simply, "Send a vehicle. I'll be there." Harris replaced the handset, relief and tension warring inside him. The storm was coming, and no one knew what would happen when Elijah Carter returned to Norfolk after 25 years. The phone had just been set down, leaving a heavy silence in the small seaside cottage outside Savannah. Elijah Carter sat motionless in his worn wooden chair, his gaze fixed on the vast ocean beyond the window, where moonlight danced across the water's surface. The gentle lapping of the waves drifted in, as if whispering an age-old story, one he had spent more than 2 decades trying to forget. Elijah's house stood quietly against the winds, unadorned and humble, with no trace of luxury. On the sun-bleached wooden walls, a row of dusty photographs from his naval days hung untouched. He had never bothered to wipe the film off. For each time he glanced at them, he was pulled back into memories he had paid too dearly to bury. At 68, Elijah still carried the robust build of his youth, but his eyes betrayed a deep, unshakable sadness. He lived alone, no family, no close friends. His only companions, the old engines he tinkered with. In one corner of the living room, a simple workbench was piled high with rusty parts, aged tools, and stained cans of oil. Now his days began with the sound of the surf, a quiet cup of coffee, and then hours spent repairing the fishing boats of local shrimpers, an existence he never could have imagined when he was once a promising young naval officer. Even as a boy in Savannah's poorer neighborhoods, Elijah had been a mechanical genius. At 8 years old, he dismantled his father's broken lawnmower, repaired it, and reassembled it perfectly, astounding even his father, a veteran machinist. By his early teens, he was scouring nearby junkyards for discarded engines and teaching himself to restore them. At 14, he became a local legend when he rebuilt an old fishing skiff's engine free of charge, earning the neighbors' undying gratitude and the affectionate nickname, the Engine Prodigy, among Savannah's fishing community. His talent truly flourished once he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. From day one, his superiors took note of his uncanny ability to diagnose and improve warship propulsion systems. By 27, he was the youngest engineering officer ever assigned to the development team for the Freedom-class destroyer, then the Navy's flagship of innovation. Colleagues and admirals alike respected his brilliance, humility, and unwavering dedication. But everything collapsed on that fateful night when he was 43. The inaugural USS Freedom suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a critical mission at sea, her main drive shutting down and leaving her adrift for hours. As the officer in charge of the ship's propulsion, Elijah was held exclusively responsible. A hurried, high-pressure investigation concluded he'd been negligent in maintenance, and he was forced into retirement in disgrace. He protested that he'd followed every protocol, even warning repeatedly of latent mechanical flaws. No one listened, perhaps because they needed a scapegoat. Perhaps because his rapid rise as a young black officer stirred envy and discomfort. In the blink of an eye, his naval career and good name lay in ruins. A once bright future vanished, replaced by the painful obscurity of a man discarded. Since then, Elijah vowed never to set foot near a Navy installation again. He retreated to Savannah, living quietly to avoid curious or pitying stares. To the locals, he was simply the kindly old mechanic with magical hands who could coax life back into battered engines. That modest peace suited him just fine. He only wanted to forget. But Admiral Michael Harris's call had shattered the calm. USS Freedom was in trouble again, and the Navy, the very institution that had erased him, desperately needed Elijah Carter. He could not deny the bitter twinge in his chest, nor the flicker of curiosity. Was this his chance to clear his name, or simply the prelude to more disappointment? The distant rumble of a military vehicle engine snapped him from his reverie. Elijah rose and stepped onto the porch, eyes locking on the approaching Humvee. In the stillness of the savannah night, he inhaled deeply and quietly, vowed to himself, maybe it's time to face the past once more. The military vehicle's brakes hissed as it came to a stop outside Elijah's cottage, the sharp screech echoing through the quiet night. Elijah stood motionless on the worn wooden steps as the headlights bore into his face, casting stark shadows into his deep-set wrinkles. In that moment, the painful memories he'd tried to bury for 25 years surged back like the storm-tossed waves far offshore. Back then, Elijah Carter was a hotshot naval officer in his early 30s, full of ambition and promise. His rare gift for warship engineering made him a rising star in the U.S. Navy. The USS Freedom wasn't just any ship. It was a breakthrough in propulsion technology, a system Elijah had poured nearly all his passion and intellect into. He remembered the endless days at Norfolk, working side by side with the Navy's top engineers, testing every nuance of that revolutionary engine. But not everyone celebrated his success. Beneath the glow of his achievements lay whispered resentments and skeptical glances, doubts that a black man from Savannah's tough neighborhoods truly deserved such a claim. Captain Thomas Grayson embodied that opposition most clearly. Grayson, a few years Elijah's senior, hailed from a storied military family and carried himself with arrogant pride. He bristled at seeing Elijah, a man of color, fast-tracked into positions Grayson believed were rightfully his. In every engineering briefing led by Elijah, Grayson's impatient scowls and pointed questions aimed to undermine him. Yet Elijah ignored it all, convinced that excellence would outshine prejudice. Everything changed one frigid winter's night, on Freedom's maiden patrol in the North Atlantic. Elijah stood in the control room, double-checking engine readings before departure. The watch was flawless, until, deep into the night, a loud bang rumbled from the engine room. In an instant, Freedom's main drive failed, leaving the mighty destroyer dead in the icy water. Elijah raced below decks, heart pounding, to diagnose the fault while officers on the bridge grew frantic. He discovered an irregularity in the fuel filter assembly, one he distinctly remembered inspecting before sail-away. Before he could explain, Grayson and several other officers stormed in, faces twisted with anger. "We all knew entrusting this mission to him was a mistake," Grayson declared, voice cold and venomous. "An irresponsible blunder like this proves Carter has no business here." By morning, with Freedom towed back to Norfolk for inquiry, Elijah's world unraveled. The investigation was swift and unforgiving. His explanations went unheard, while Grayson's accusations were eagerly accepted. It was as if they'd been waiting for a chance to bring him down. Elijah pleaded with Admiral Charles Whitmore, his direct commander, that he'd rigorously checked that filter and suspected deliberate tampering. Whitmore's reply was a curt dismissal, disappointment and doubt in his gaze. "Carter, I once trusted you." "But this failure is too grave. We can't overlook it." Elijah realized then that to those officers his race and background had always cast him as an outsider. Despite his service and talent, a single unexplained mishap was enough to exile him from the Navy he'd devoted his life to. Forced into early retirement, Elijah left Norfolk in silence, carrying a bitter burden no one understood. For 25 years he lived overshadowed by that injustice, shunning everyone who knew him and declining every chance to clear his name. Now, as the military vehicle idled beneath his porch, that old wound yawned open again. He knew this time wasn't merely about fixing a ship's engine. It was a chance to confront and finally silence the dark specter that had haunted him for nearly 3 decades. With resolve hardening in his chest, Elijah descended the steps and approached the waiting vehicle, ready at last to fight for the justice and honor that had long been denied him. Elijah's final step onto the military vehicle was met by a cold sea breeze that made him shiver. In that instant, his shirt pocket phone vibrated again. He paused a heartbeat before checking the screen, and there it was, a name he hadn't expected but wasn't surprised to see: Rear Admiral Michael Harris. The young driver sat watching him through the windshield, expectant. Elijah held up a finger to signal, "Just a moment," then lifted the phone to his ear. "Michael," Elijah said, his voice low and steady, yet edged with barely concealed anxiety. "Sorry to call again, Elijah," Harris replied quickly, his tone more tense but far more sincere than before. "But I thought you should know a few more things before you decide." Elijah didn't answer right away. A long silence stretched out, broken only by the distant surf. Finally, he spoke. "Go ahead, Michael, I'm listening." Harris's voice lowered, as if he were stifling guilt. "I know what happened back then cost you dearly. I also know the real cause was never fully uncovered. But this time, the situation is dire. USS Freedom's engine failed just as she was about to embark on a top-secret mission. This isn't merely a routine patrol, Elijah. It's a matter of national security. We've tried everything, and no one can fix it. Only you can." At the mention of freedom, Elijah's heart clenched. Every time he heard that name, the agony of betrayal, the doubting glances, and the contempt from his superiors flooded back like it happened yesterday. And yet he couldn't deny the deep pride and bond he'd once felt for that ship, the countless hours he'd devoted to its design, every ounce of his intellect and passion invested there. "Michael," Elijah said, his voice trembling with emotion, "do you know what that ship took from me?" "I do," Harris replied at once, his own voice unsteady, "and I know no one ever admitted their mistake. But I've studied that incident closely for years. You were right, Elijah. Evidence shows someone deliberately tampered with the propulsion system. I know you're innocent." Elijah's heart pounded. 25 years of living under doubt and disgrace. And now, for the first time, he heard an acknowledgement from someone who'd witnessed it all. "Then, why didn't you speak up back then?" Elijah asked, bitterness in every syllable. "At the time, I was just a junior officer with no clout," Harris sighed. "You know how the Navy was. I had no power, no voice to defend you. But things are different now. I want to right those wrongs, both for you and for the honor of the U.S. Navy." Harris's heartfelt admission hit Elijah hard. Inside him, a fierce struggle began. Part of him wanted to refuse, to leave the past buried and avoid more pain. But another part yearned to return, to confront the injustice and watch the truth come to light. Elijah was silent for a long moment, staring out at the dark ocean. Finally, he asked softly but weightily, "What about Grayson?" Harris hesitated, then spoke gravely. "Thomas Grayson retired a few years ago and keeps a low profile in Virginia, but I'd bet he's watching this closely. If you come back, we can finally settle everything." Elijah drew a deep breath, feeling the crushing weight on his chest lift bit by bit. After 25 years, he had a chance to clear his name and reclaim the truth and honor stolen from him. "I understand, Michael," he said firmly. "I'll come back. But not for my pride or anything else. I'm coming back to make sure no one else ever suffers what I did." "Thank you, Elijah," Harris said immediately, relief in his voice. Is the vehicle here? Elijah looked back at the young soldier waiting patiently in the driver's seat and nodded, buoyed by his own resolve. Yes, I'll see you soon. The call ended. Elijah stood for a few seconds, his heart pounding wildly. He knew this decision wasn't easy. Returning to Norfolk meant facing those painful memories, the skeptical eyes, and the people who betrayed him. But alongside his doubts and fears, he felt something clear. He no longer feared the past. This time, he was ready to face it, no matter what lay ahead. Elijah climbed into the back seat and sat upright. As the vehicle rolled toward Naval Station Norfolk, the place that had cast him into despair, one thought burned bright in his mind. It's time to end all this pain. The military vehicle slowed as it neared the main gate of Naval Station Norfolk, what had once been Elijah's second home during the pinnacle of his career. Elijah looked out the window as razor wire fences, guard towers, and familiar buildings came into view. But this return brought neither joy nor pride. Instead, an invisible tension gripped his chest, each passing second feeling like a trial he must endure once again. The vehicle came to a halt at the security checkpoint, and the two young guards immediately turned to him with unmistakable suspicion. Elijah stepped down, his posture still erect and authoritative, though his hair had long since turned salt and pepper. His expression was cool, composed yet stern. One guard, Anderson, read the name Patch, stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "State your name and purpose for entering the station, sir," he demanded, his tone cold and dismissive, as though Elijah were an unremarkable stranger. Elijah replied clearly and confidently, "Elijah Carter. I'm here at Admiral Harris's request." Anderson frowned, exchanged a knowing glance with his partner, then tapped at his tablet. After a few tense seconds, he said reluctantly, "You're cleared, but remember, this is a restricted area. Follow all regulations." Elijah nodded without comment and passed through the gate. He recognized their looks all too well, ingrained doubt and a hint of disrespect he'd endured for years, but he had no intention of wasting time on that now. A far more urgent matter awaited: USS Freedom and the engineers helpless before this crisis. The main engineering bay was brightly lit despite the late hour. As Elijah entered, a hush fell over the room. Scores of young engineers turned to study him, curious, wary, their contempt barely concealed. Among them, one man stood out. Tall, around 34, with cold, confident eyes. He strode forward without a hint of welcome. Elijah guessed this was Ryan Watkins, the chief engineer Harris had mentioned. "So, this is Elijah Carter?" Watkins sneered, surveying Elijah's plain, older appearance. "The man Admiral Harris thinks can save the day?" The air crackled. Elijah met Watkins' gaze calmly. "Yes, I'm here to assess the problem immediately." Watkins let out a derisive chuckle, making the tension spike. He leaned in close, voice low and challenging. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, we've tried everything. I doubt you, retired 25 years ago, can fix anything here." Elijah remained unruffled, eyes steady. "If you've truly tried everything, why isn't the engine running?" Anger flared in Watkins's eyes. He ground out his words. "We don't need interference from an old man whose mistakes cost the Navy dearly." A heavy silence followed. No one dared speak. Then Elijah stepped forward, voice firm and authoritative, catching Watkins off guard. "Mr. Watkins, you may have heard twisted stories, but you don't know the truth. I'm not here to revisit the past. I'm here to solve a critical issue that affects the entire country. If you refuse to cooperate, your failure, not mine, will be on the line." Watkins' face flushed, but he couldn't deny the weight of Elijah's words. He turned away, fists clenched. "Fine, Carter. Try your best, but if you fail, it'll only prove the Navy right to cast you aside." He strode back to his workstation at the far end of the bay, young engineers scurrying after him, leaving Elijah alone in the vast room where tension and competition crackled at a peak. Elijah felt anger and pain churn together. He knew Watkins's attitude sprang from the same entrenched bias he'd confronted for years, but he wasn't here to prove himself to Watkins. He was here to fix the problem, to show he'd never been at fault, and above all, to defend the honor of the Navy he once served with pride. Elijah walked to the central console, drew in a deep breath, and steeled himself for the greatest challenge of his life. Not just repairing a ship's engine, but facing those who had belittled, betrayed, and denied him for 25 years. This time, he vowed, he would not back down. Elijah's heavy footsteps rang out on the metal floor of the engine room, each thud striking the already tense air like a hammer. The young engineers, their faces a mix of suspicion and apprehension, clustered in small groups, whispering among themselves and casting furtive glances his way. Elijah paid them no mind. His focus was entirely on the control panels and the complex monitoring systems before him. He knew one indisputable fact. To diagnose the fault, he had to run the USS Freedom's engine at full power, but that request was hardly one anyone would approve lightly. "Watkins," Elijah called to the chief engineer a few paces away, his tone calm but firm. "I want to perform a full-power test run." Watkins sprang to his feet, face flushed with anger. "You've got to be kidding, Carter. The engine's already compromised. Running it flat out now is suicide. If anything goes wrong, are you prepared to take responsibility?" The room grew even quieter. Every engineer froze, staring at the two men in stunned anticipation. Elijah met Watkins's glare without flinching. "Mr. Watkins, the only way to pinpoint the issue is a full-power run. I designed this engine. I know its limits. If you want a solution, you'll follow my instructions." Watkins stepped forward, almost shouting. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I refuse to let you make fools of all of us. I'm the one in charge here, not some retired old man who left the Navy 25 years ago." Hearts pounded at the explosive confrontation. Elijah remained unmoved, his voice even. "If you're truly responsible, why isn't the engine running yet? You can protest, but if this mission fails, whose neck do you think will be on the chopping block?" Watkins's face drained of color, anger mixing with the embarrassment of having been exposed. After a taut silence, he spun on his heel. "Fine, you want to play daredevil? Go ahead, but don't say I didn't warn you." Elijah said nothing further. He calmly opened the toolbox he'd brought from Savannah and removed an old brass listening rod, polished smooth at the ends from years of use. The young engineers watched in bewilderment and barely concealed scorn. "Is he seriously going to listen to the engine with a brass rod?" Jeremy, standing near Watkins, snickered. "What century is this?" Soft laughter rippled through the room, but Elijah ignored it. He approached the engine, placed one end of the rod against the metal casing and the other against his ear. Watkins's embarrassment flared to fury. He reached to snatch it away, but a junior officer stepped between them. "Watkins, let him try. We've run out of options." Watkins shoved the officer aside, eyes blazing, then retreated, still seething. The room fell silent once again. After several intense minutes, Elijah set the rod down, eyes shining with conviction. He turned to Watkins and the gathered engineers, his voice resonant and authoritative. "The sensors and electronics are fine. The engine has a slight shaft misalignment at high RPMs, causing severe vibration and triggering the automatic shutdown. Only a full-power run would reveal this. The engineers stared at each other in disbelief. Watkins let out a bitter laugh. "So, you're telling me all our advanced gear and expertise miss something that simple? It's ridiculous." Elijah shrugged. "Modern instruments are excellent, but they have their limits. Sometimes only experience and intuition catch those subtle faults. You don't have to take my word for it. Just inspect the shaft alignment and vibration at full RPM. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and never return." No one spoke. The defiant spark in Watkins' eyes dimmed under the weight of Elijah's challenge. The room held its breath, waiting for Watkins' next move. Elijah stood tall, confidence unshaken. This time, he knew he was right. The engine room remained deathly silent, breaths frozen in midair as Elijah's declaration echoed through the space. Watkins stood motionless, his anger giving way to conflict and doubt, though he fought to maintain his pride and composure in front of the watching engineers. "Mr. Carter," Watkins said, his voice trembling as he tried to mask it, "are you saying that the Navy's entire sophisticated diagnostic system failed to detect a basic shaft misalignment? That's absurd." Elijah sighed, meeting Watkins' gaze with sharp but unprovocative eyes. "I'm not dismissing modern equipment, Watkins, but some faults are invisible to machines. Only the human ear can catch those subtle vibrations at high frequency. I know exactly what I heard. A misaligned shaft at high RPM, that's the only explanation." Watkins turned to the young engineers around him, seeking their support, but found only confused, hesitant looks. Jeremy, the junior engineer who had mocked Elijah earlier, spoke up tentatively. "Sir, maybe we should at least recheck the alignment." Watkins cut him off immediately, eyeballing Jeremy with a warning glare. "You really want to trust that nonsense, Jeremy? I won't waste my team's time on some retired grandpa chasing lost pride after decades of failure." Each of Watkins's words felt like a knife twisting in Elijah's pride. He'd endured countless skeptical stares and whispered jibes in his youth, but he'd never felt such sting. Not just personal disrespect, but an insult to his knowledge and experience. "Mr. Watkins," Elijah said again, his voice dropping to a commanding rumble, "I have no need to prove my honor to you. I'm simply stating the truth. If you insist on calling this ridiculous, fine, go ahead. But remember, if this engine continues to fail, the blame will rest on you." Watkins let out a bitter laugh and stepped inches from Elijah, their eyes locking like colliding sparks. "Blame? You lecture me on responsibility, Carter? The man who left a blot on Navy history, who caused the USS Freedom's failure 25 years ago. I'll never let you point fingers at this engineering team again." The tension snapped taut as a drawn bow. A few engineers rushed forward to separate them before things got worse. Elijah stood his ground, fury blazing in his eyes, but beneath it, a profound sorrow. "You know nothing about me, Watkins," Elijah said quietly, bitterness in his tone. "But I hope you're smart enough not to let your pride cost the Navy dearly." Without waiting for a response, Elijah turned and strode out of the engine room, leaving behind a heavy hush. Every pair of eyes followed his retreating figure, astonished, uneasy, yet tinged with reluctant respect. Watkins remained frozen in place, emotions roiling inside him. Part of him wanted to brush it off and get back to work, but another part was unsettled by Elijah's final words. Just then, Jeremy spoke again, soft but clear, breaking the oppressive quiet. "Sir, I really think we should recheck the shaft alignment as Mr. Carter suggested. I don't believe he'd make that claim without reason." Watkins spun back, voice low and threatening. "Are you siding with him or with this team, Jeremy?" Jeremy jumped back, face flushed with anxiety. "I'm not taking sides. I just want to solve the problem." Watkins drew a deep breath, struggling to rein in his anger. He scanned the room and saw anxious, uncertain faces among the engineers. Silently cursing Elijah for stirring up dissent, he nevertheless knew in his heart Elijah had struck a chord. Watkins' overblown confidence had left him blind to a simple truth. Finally, Watkins' voice softened as he issued a reluctant order. "Fine. Run the shaft alignment checks again, this time thoroughly. I want hard proof that Carter is wrong." Immediately, the young engineers scattered to reconfigure their instruments. No one spoke. The heavy tension still pressed in on them all. Outside the engine room, Elijah stood alone in the shadowed corridor, his breath heavy. At last, he allowed himself to feel the swirl of emotions inside. Disappointment, indignation, and a deep sadness at facing prejudice and doubt once more. But deep within, a small spark of hope flickered. Perhaps, if even one of them was willing to set aside pride and listen, things could change. Elijah inhaled deeply, straightened his shoulders, and turned his gaze toward the USS Freedom lying silent under the bright hangar lights, the ship he'd once poured all his youthful passion into. He whispered to himself, "This time, I won't let anyone bury the truth again." Inside the engine room, the air remained so still it felt suffocating as Watkins studied every readout on the large display before him. He fought to conceal the growing unease within. The young engineers around him worked cautiously, no one daring to speak after the fierce confrontation with Elijah moments ago. Watkins clenched his fists, anger and doubt racking him, and yet, deep down, one thought gnawed at him. If Elijah Carter was truly right, what would that mean for all the mocking and confidence he'd displayed earlier? "Run the engine at high RPM," Watkins ordered, his voice taut. "Monitor vibration and shaft alignment very closely." Immediately, tension spiked again as the engine roared to life. The rumble echoed so powerfully that each engineer's heart seemed to skip a beat. Watkins stared intently at the screens, refusing to miss even the slightest fluctuation. Suddenly, Jeremy's face went pale as he spotted a tiny anomaly on the shaft alignment chart, something no one had noticed before. He turned to Watkins, voice trembling. "Sir, I think Mr. Carter was right. The shaft misalignment shows up very slightly at maximum RPM." The room fell into absolute silence. Watkins felt his world spin, his confidence shattered in an instant. He lunged at the display, eyes wide with horror as he realized Jeremy was correct. That tiny misalignment had been overlooked in dozens of prior tests, because even the most advanced instruments couldn't detect such a subtle yet deadly vibration. Yet Elijah Carter, the man Watkins had once scorned, had pinpointed it with nothing but an old brass rod and extraordinary experience. Watkins stumbled back, face burning with shame. The entire engineering team watched him with a mix of sympathy and disappointment. They waited for his response to this grave error. "Continue monitoring," Watkins said quietly, voice shaky. I need to call Mr. Carter." He turned and hurried from the room, his heart pounding as though it would burst. Leaning against the corridor wall, he fumbled for his phone with trembling hands. Inside, he fought a violent struggle between pride and guilt. Never had he imagined begging help from the man he'd openly disdained. Finally, Watkins exhaled deeply and dialed. Seconds later, Elijah's calm, measured voice answered, "Carter here." Watkins hesitated, palms slick with sweat. "Mr. Carter, "It's Watkins. I need to speak with you." Elijah was silent for a moment, then replied, his tone cool yet softened. "I'm listening." Watkins drew another breath, striving to steady his voice. We rechecked the engine, as you suggested, and you were absolutely right. The shaft misalignment only appears at top RPM, just as you said." There was a pause on the line. Watkins, seizing on the quiet, spoke rapidly, awkward and earnest. "I sincerely apologize for my attitude earlier. I was wrong to doubt and dismiss you. Right now, we truly need your help." Elijah remained silent a moment longer, then finally spoke, weary yet forgiving. "I'll come back immediately, but I hope this time you'll understand the value of listening and respecting experience." Watkins exhaled in relief, the weight in his chest lightening somewhat. "Understood, sir. Again, I'm sorry and thank you." After the call ended, Watkins stood in the corridor for minutes, his heart still racing. He knew his actions had wounded his pride, but for the first time in his life, Watkins felt profound respect for Elijah Carter, the man he had once regarded as a failure. Meanwhile, outside the base under the silent night sky, Elijah stood alone, gazing upward at the stars that seemed to bear witness to the turmoil in his heart. He knew that returning to the station today wasn't just about fixing an engine. It was about healing the wound that had haunted him for so many years. Part of him still ached at the injustices of the past, but another part urged him forward, to confront everything and finally set the record straight. Elijah sighed, then turned back toward the base. In his heart, a fierce determination burned. This time, he would not only repair the ship, he would prove beyond doubt that truth and a man's dignity can never be buried forever. And this time, he wasn't coming back just for himself, but for the honor of everyone who had ever been doubted, dismissed, and treated unfairly, just like he had been. Steeling himself, Elijah strode forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. When Elijah steps back into the engine room, every young engineer's eyes snap to him. Waiting, wary, Watkins stands there, his embarrassment still visible. But this time he takes a step forward as Elijah approaches. "We're ready to cooperate and follow your lead, Mr. Carter," Watkins says. "We don't have much time left." Elijah nods quietly. No reproach, no pride. He knows the only thing that matters now is getting the engine repaired as fast as possible. The clock on the wall ticks relentlessly, each second a mounting pressure on the team. "First," Elijah announces in his deep, authoritative voice, "we need to remove the protective casing and realign the engine shaft. Prepare the laser alignment tools and the vibration analyzers." The young engineers immediately split up and get to work with practiced efficiency. But challenges arise almost at once. When they pull off the casing, they discover the shaft is misaligned far more than they'd expected. Worse yet, the main drive gears are severely worn, nearly to the red alert threshold. Watkins glances at Elijah, concern etched on his face. "This is worse than we thought, Mr. Carter. If we can't replace these gears in time, the engine won't run stably." Elijah narrows his eyes as he inspects the gears, his aged but steady hands brushing over their worn teeth. His voice remains calm and decisive. "We don't have time to swap out every gear. Pull the auxiliary gears from the ship's backup drive and assemble them into a new gearbox. It won't be perfect, but it will get the ship underway." The team flinches at this bold plan. Jeremy, hesitating, finally speaks up. "Sir, that's risky. There's no precedent for it." Elijah meets Jeremy's gaze without flinching. "We're facing an unprecedented emergency, son, but I guarantee this will work. Trust my experience." Jeremy falls silent, his eyes flickering with newfound respect. He and the others dive into the task. Side by side, Elijah and Watkins coordinate the team as if conducting a military operation. Every second counts, and no motion is wasted. But more setbacks follow. Once the gears are fitted, the laser system keeps flagging an error. The young engineers grow flustered. Tension spikes again. Watkins rechecks the setup but finds nothing wrong. "Mr. Carter, the laser won't lock on the correct angle. We're running out of time," Watkins admits, his voice trembling with genuine fear for the first time. Elijah closes his eyes for a heartbeat, gathering his thoughts. Then he opens them, clarity shining in his gaze. The laser is probably being disrupted by electromagnetic interference from nearby electronics. "Shut down all non-essential devices around the engine area and try again." Watkins and the engineers scramble to power down the extra equipment. With the interference gone, the laser alignment system immediately stabilizes. Watkins turns to Elijah, astonished and admiring. "I can't believe it, Mr. Carter. How did you spot that so quickly?" Elijah offers a gentle smile and pats Watkins on the shoulder. "Intuition, experience, and a bit of luck. But there's no time to celebrate. Let's keep going." All through the base, alarms sound. Less than an hour remains before USS Freedom must sail. The PA system crackles with urgent announcements, and every technician in the room is sweating but silent, each person fully focused, racing the clock. Finally, with 5 minutes to launch, the makeshift gearbox is assembled. Watkins breathes hard, eyes locked on Elijah. "One last test, Mr. Carter. I really hope you're right." Elijah nods, his gaze as steely as forged metal. "I have faith, Watkins." Watkins signals to start the engine. The room holds its breath. The engine roars to life, hesitates for a moment, and then surges smoothly through its power band. Every gauge on the display shifts to green. A wave of relieved applause ripples through the engineers, still tinged with tension. Even though the engine is up and running at the critical moment, Elijah knows the danger isn't over. An invisible weight still hangs over everyone. No one knows if this emergency repair can hold for the entire mission. Watkins turns to him quietly, sincere for the first time. "Thank you, Carter. But I understand we're not out of the woods yet." Elijah nods, eyes on the USS Freedom framed in the hangar doorway. He realizes his battle isn't finished, but at least for now, he's done everything possible to save the mission and, perhaps, reclaim the truth and honor he's carried all these years. When the powerful roar of USS Freedom's engine steadied and echoed throughout Norfolk, the entire engine room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Yet in Elijah Carter's heart, that sense of victory was still tinged with nervous anticipation, and he couldn't fully shake the pain of a quarter-century's worth of past wounds. While the young engineers congratulated one another on narrowly averting disaster, Elijah quietly slipped outside to find a moment's solitude. Outside, the Norfolk sky was just beginning to brighten. A brilliant dawn glowed on the eastern horizon, its light glinting off USS Freedom's hull and transforming her into a symbol of renewal and hope. Elijah stood there, eyes fixed on the ship, thinking that this might be the last time he'd see her off on a mission so critical. Familiar footsteps approached from behind. Elijah turned to see Admiral Michael Harris walking toward him. For the first time in years, Harris's eyes held nothing but respect, honesty, and a deep sense of regret. "Mr. Carter," Admiral Harris began, his voice far softer than before, "might I have a few minutes of your time?" Elijah nodded, curiosity and anticipation mingling in his chest. Harris reached into his dress uniform and produced a neatly sealed white envelope, his hand trembling slightly as he offered it to Elijah. "Elijah, this is an official apology from the U.S. Navy," Harris said, his voice charged with emotion. "After reviewing the records and conducting an internal inquiry, we've determined you were entirely innocent of the events 25 years ago. Evidence was deliberately overlooked by individuals driven by prejudice and malice." Elijah's fingers trembled as he took the envelope. He had longed for this moment for 25 years. Yet, now that it was here, words failed him. A wave of relief washed over him, mingled with an overwhelming sense of emotion. "I know this comes far too late," Harris continued, voice heavy with remorse, "but I want you to know, the Navy has not forgotten your contributions. Those responsible for the injustice you suffered will be held accountable." Elijah looked up at Harris. His eyes bore no trace of bitterness, only the calm steadiness of a man who'd weathered countless storms. "Thank you, Michael. What matters most now isn't punishment, but that the truth is finally recognized. I hope no one else ever endures what I went through." Harris laid a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his gaze sincere and emotional. "You have always earned our highest respect, Elijah. I'm personally grateful you returned to help us this time." As Harris departed, Elijah remained in the rising sunlight. He broke open the envelope and read the official exoneration from the Navy. Each word was like a clear drop of water refreshing his soul, easing decades of bitterness. For the first time in years, he felt truly unburdened, freed from the weight he'd carried for so long. Then he heard another familiar voice. It was Watkins. Elijah turned to see the young engineer standing there, awkward but earnest. "Mr. Carter, I want to apologize sincerely for all the terrible things I said and thought about you," Watkins began, his voice quivering with remorse. "I was too confident in my own abilities and forgot that your experience and intuition are priceless." Elijah studied him quietly, sensing the deep regret and sincerity in his words. Watkins continued, emotion breaking through. "I was wrong to look down on you, and equally wrong not to listen. You've taught me a powerful lesson, one of humility and respect. To me, you're not only an outstanding engineer, but also a great teacher." Elijah offered a gentle smile and placed a hand on Watkins's shoulder, his eyes full of compassion and encouragement. "Watkins, in our field, perfection isn't everything. What matters most is our willingness to acknowledge and correct our mistakes. Today, you've done exactly that. I believe you'll go far." Watkins nodded, a genuine smile at last lighting his face. "I'll never forget this lesson, Mr. Carter, and I'd be honored if you'd come back to teach us more someday." After Watkins left, Elijah stood alone once more, but he no longer felt lonely. His heart brimmed with a profound peace he'd never known in all those years. Looking at USS Freedom preparing to depart, he felt the bitterness and hurt of the past melt away, replaced by renewed faith in justice and the power of sincerity and perseverance. Elijah closed his eyes, feeling the morning sun warm his face. He knew this was not just his victory, but a victory for everyone who'd ever suffered injustice and prejudice as he had. And he understood, at last, that he had truly found the peace he'd sought for so long. That morning, the Norfolk sky seemed bluer than usual. Bright sunlight bathed the entire naval base, where a dignified stage had been set up near the pier, with the USS Freedom proudly moored alongside. Hundreds of officers, engineers, and enlisted personnel in crisp uniforms stood in formation, all eyes fixed respectfully on the stage in eager anticipation. Elijah waited just off stage, his breathing calm but deep. For the first time in decades, he returned here not as an outcast but as an honored guest. dressed in the formal Navy dress uniform that Admiral Harris had presented to him. He glanced down at the medals pinned to his chest, and a flood of both unfamiliar and deeply cherished emotions welled up inside him. From the podium, the Master of Ceremonies' voice rang out clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the United States Navy, today is a special day. We are not only here to honor a hero who has given his life to the service, but also to restore the honor of a man who endured injustice for over 2 decades, Mr. Elijah Carter." Thunderous applause rolled across the crowd like distant thunder. Elijah stepped onto the stage, buoyed by their warm welcome. He looked out at the faces before him, including those who had once opposed him so fiercely. His gaze lingered on Captain Thomas Grayson, the very officer who had leveled false accusations against him 25 years ago. Now, Grayson's hair was gray, and his eyes averted Elijah's, shame and regret plain upon his features. Admiral Michael Harris stood beside Elijah. Moving to the microphone, Harris spoke with genuine warmth. "Today, we gather to correct a grave mistake the Navy once made. On behalf of the United States Navy, I offer my deepest apology to Mr. Elijah Carter. For the past 25 years, you suffered pain you did not deserve. Today, we officially restore to you the honor and dignity that were rightfully yours." Turning to Elijah, Harris took his hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Elijah, thank you for giving us this opportunity to make amends and to recognize the true value of steadfast integrity." Another wave of applause swept the stage. Elijah approached the microphone, took a steadying breath, and felt his heart pound more fiercely than usual. Yet, when he spoke, his voice was strong, resonant, and full of feeling. "I've thought long and hard about what I'd say today. For 25 years I wondered whether justice truly exists. I lost faith in the ideals I once held dear, honor, loyalty, and camaraderie. But standing here with all of you, I've come to understand that justice does prevail. It just sometimes arrives later than we hope." He let his eyes sweep the crowd, settling on the young engineers, especially Watkins, who now stood at attention, genuine respect in his gaze. "I bear no anger or resentment. I realize that prejudice and misunderstanding can lead people astray. What matters most is that we have the courage to acknowledge and correct our mistakes. Today, I stand here not only for myself, but for all those who have suffered injustice as I did, people who never had the chance to receive an apology like this." Many in the audience dabbed away tears, moved by the sincerity and nobility in Elijah's words. He continued, his voice growing stronger. "Remember, true strength doesn't lie in power, rank, or advanced weapons. It lies in our ability to recognize our own errors and to show compassion. My hope is that the lesson of today will be remembered, so no one else suffers the wrongful pain I endured." As Elijah finished, applause thundered and would not cease. Senior officers approached to shake his hand with heartfelt respect. Even Captain Grayson stepped forward, genuine remorse at last on his face. "Elijah, I sincerely apologize for all that transpired. I hope you can forgive me, though I know I do not deserve it." Elijah regarded Grayson kindly and replied softly, "I forgave you long ago, Thomas. Now, forgive yourself. Life is too short to hold on to bitterness." After the ceremony, Elijah stood alone on the pier, watching the majestic USS Freedom slowly pull away. The great ship glided into open water, leaving a white wake as a testament to renewed strength and faith. Elijah inhaled deeply, feeling the cool sea breeze on his face, and for the first time in many years, he felt truly light, peaceful, and proud. In that moment, he knew his own journey had reached its end. not with bitterness or grievance, but with renewed belief in justice and forgiveness restored in his heart. The helicopter's rotor blades droned steadily, gently slicing through the vast expanse as they carried Elijah away from Naval Station Norfolk, where he had just reclaimed the honor and recognition he deserved so long ago. Seated in the cabin, his gaze remained fixed on the USS Freedom, now little more than a speck fading on the horizon. Yet, despite the growing distance, he felt the bond between himself and that ship as keenly as ever. A vessel that held so many bitter memories, but which now stood as a symbol of rebirth and forgiveness. Across from him sat the young officer Jeremy, who had once doubted but now harbored deep respect for Elijah. Quietly, he broke the silence. "Mr. Carter, what do you make of everything that just happened?" Elijah smiled kindly, his eyes distant, yet his voice clear and warm. "I think life sometimes puts us through challenges we can't fully understand at the moment. But what matters most is holding fast to our faith in justice and in ourselves. If we do that, truth will always be on our side in the end." Jeremy nodded thoughtfully, admiration shining in his eyes. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Carter. I've learned more from you than just technical skills." As the helicopter descended onto the clearing behind Elijah's familiar seaside cottage in Savannah, Elijah gently tapped Jeremy's shoulder in parting encouragement. "Always remember, young man, a person's true worth never lies in outward appearances, but in the heart and deeds of each of us." Jeremy returned his salute, then stepped back for the chopper's takeoff. Elijah watched the aircraft retreat into the sky, a calm he'd never known washing over him. He climbed the weathered wooden steps to his porch, the very place he had spent countless solitary, bitter afternoons. Today, however, when he settled into his old wooden chair and gazed out over the endless ocean, the feeling inside him was wholly different. No more bitterness, no more grievance, only a profound peace and lightness he hadn't felt in 25 long years. He recalled every face from this journey. Watkins's initial doubt, Captain Grayson's sincere remorse, Admiral Harris's heartfelt respect. Each had been a small piece of the larger picture of his life. And in that moment, Elijah realized that he harbored no regrets about the past. Everything he'd endured had been necessary to teach him his own true worth and the meaning of forgiveness. The gentle rhythm of the waves rose like a peaceful melody soothing his soul. Elijah drew a deep breath, feeling complete healing settle into his heart. The old wounds no longer pained him. In their place was an effortless calm and acceptance of what had been. He looked out to sea, where the sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In that instant, he understood that life, like the ocean, holds fierce storms and trials, but that ultimately peace and faith endure. In Elijah's heart, a powerful thought rang out like a declaration to himself and to the world. Justice may come late, but it is never too late to reclaim it. Faith and perseverance will always triumph over prejudice. Seated in his familiar chair, Elijah closed his eyes and savored the absolute serenity filling him. He knew his painful journey had come to an end, and that a new, brighter, more hopeful chapter was beginning. The sea breeze whispered against his face, as if telling him of the days to come and the future he was now ready to embrace. And far away, the USS Freedom sailed on, a reminder that belief and justice endure, stronger than any injustice. Elijah offered a gentle smile, his heart brimming with gratitude and joy. In this moment of pure beauty and peace, he realized he had finally found what every person seeks in life: freedom in his soul and the true value of himself, beyond all prejudice, injustice, and limitation. Thank you for following Elijah Carter's emotional journey to reclaim justice. Once an ex-Navy engineer who bore a wrongful disgrace for 25 years. His story reminds us of the power of perseverance and faith, and that every person's true worth rises above prejudice and injustice. What do you think of Elijah's actions? If you were in his shoes, would you have the courage to return to the place that once caused you pain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, please like, share with friends and family, and subscribe for more compelling stories in the future. See you in the next video.